Larry Osborne here with some advice. Stop preaching to an empty room. Now you're thinking, what do you mean stop preaching to an empty room? That's what all of us are doing these days. Well, yeah, we're actually preaching to an empty room, but in another sense, we've got to stop preaching to an empty room. And my friend Chris Bell, the pastor of Three Circle Church in Alabama, has a great short little video piece that he put together talking about what it means to not preach to an empty room, even when the room is empty. I think you'll find it helpful. So take a look at it.
My name's Chris Bell. I'm the lead pastor of Three Circle Church on the Gulf Coast in Alabama. We're a multi-site church, and I think there's some lessons that we've learned over the years that hopefully can help you guys, because right now we're facing a very unique situation as pastors, as leaders, and as preachers and communicators. This global pandemic due to the coronavirus has kind of forced all of us into some situations maybe we've never been through. And one that has kind of risen to the top that I've heard a lot about is the fact that many of us, for the first time, are having to record sermons that are going to then be posted for our congregations. Now guys, I'm with you on this. We have a sacred calling to communicate the gospel and to preach the word of God to our people. So how do we do that well? And what I'm hearing a lot is that people are struggling with the fact that they're having to preach to an empty room. So as a multi-site pastor here for years, I actually recorded to an empty room because we did not have the technology yet to simply live stream. So I think for 5 or 6 years, I pre-recorded our multi-site campus sermons to an empty room. And for weeks and weeks, maybe a few months, I had a really hard time with that until one day I feel like God, through the Word of God, helped me understand a better way. And you know what? I stopped preaching to an empty room. And that's what I want to tell you today. The big idea is don't preach to an empty room anymore. I got this idea from the Apostle Paul and Peter and the writers of the New Testament, because as I was studying the Word of God, I realized that the passion could clearly be seen in the words of Paul and Peter in the New Testament. And those guys were writing often in jail cells and certainly not to the entire congregation. They couldn't see them in front of them, but yet it seems like they could, and here's why. I'm convinced that Paul and Peter and the rest of those amazing men, they did not write to empty rooms. While Paul was in prison writing Ephesians, he was writing to people. He even calls names in some of his epistles. You can feel the passion seeping through the words and the pages, guys. So I think what we can learn from them is that you don't preach to empty rooms. You preach to people. You preach to faces. You preach to the people you know are going to listen to this teaching. So right out of the gate, I just want to give you a few things that'll help. Number one, don't preach to the empty room anymore. Preach to people. Get them in your mind. Get your people that God has given you to shepherd and oversee and lead and feed. Those are the people you need to have in your mind. And there's some practical ways, by the way, to bring this concept alive for you. And here's a few. Number one, I would recommend you actually sit down and write down some names before you preach. You're probably not going to be able to write your whole congregation down, so switch it up every time. But have 10 or 15 names that you literally look at on a page, and you think about those people and you get them in your mind as you go up to record your sermon. A good friend of mine who heard me talk about this a few days ago sent me a picture of himself preaching and recording, and what he did is he went and took pictures and had them printed out and put them on a poster board and put them in front of him while he was preaching to the camera, and he said it helped him tremendously. Because guys, what we want to do is not be mechanical. We want to be passionate as we preach the Word of God to our people. So I recommend actually getting names in front of you and in your mind. Secondly, pray for the people you're going to preach to, and pray for as many of them by name as you can before you preach. Again, one way I did this, because I pastor a large church, is I would get groups of names from our campuses and I would pray over them by name before I preached. This brought my preaching alive. Thirdly, this is a big one, I always tried before I recorded each week to call several of the people from the campuses and just talk to them. Find out how they're doing, find out what's going on, actually get them on the phone. And by the way, we got a lot of time on our hands to do this right now. When you begin to call 3, 4, 5 people before you preach, what happens is you have them in your mind and you're going to hear their needs. And I'm telling you guys, it will bring your preaching alive. Those are just a few things that I think can tremendously help as we enter into a time of uncertainty. You may be preaching to an empty room, if you will, for weeks and weeks and weeks. But I'm here to tell you today, you need to stop preaching to the empty room. No more empty room preaching. You preach to people. By the power of God, by the sacred calling He's given us, I'm praying that we all don't preach to the room, we preach to the people. and use some of those simple ways to bring that alive in your heart and in your mind. Guys, as one pastor to a bunch of great pastors, I want you to know I'm praying for you, hoping that God and believing that God is going to use all of us during this time. Because folks, when the coronavirus hit, it didn't stop what we're called to do. We are shepherds underneath the great shepherd, and I'm praying that we will all be found faithful. And I hope that in some way what I've told you today can help you. Thank you guys, and God bless.
Wow, that was great, wasn't it? Again, Chris, thank you so much. And by the way, if you'd like to continue to receive these things from me and the Training Network, when we've got something to offer you, just go ahead and hit subscribe down below, and we'll make sure you know about the next one. God bless and stay safe.